Today, I want to discuss a book I recently finished, I Am a Strange Loop by Douglas Hofstadter. I'm going to talk about some of the learnings I have from the book, also just a few ideas about the book itself and how it relates to my business. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's July 17th, 2020. This is Krimdelko. Today, we're up 1%. The market was up about 20 basis points. We are up 131%. The market is down 0.5%. We're outperforming by 131.5% for the year. Douglas Hofstadter has written one of his most famous books, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and a follow-up book on that, I Am a Strange Loop, has been published about almost 30 years after he wrote Gödel, Escher, Bach. Hofstadter himself is a thinker of thinking, so he's a meta thinker, and I think the most interesting thing about the book is that it gave me tools for thinking. I have stated several times in various episodes how important reading is to the hedge fund business. And a book like I'm a Strange Loop is exactly the kind of book that every once in a while you want to read. It's a book about thinking. So, what does that mean? Well, it has some technical advice. For example, there are literally tools for thinking that Hofstadter goes through in his book. And the tools are, for example, recursiveness, infinity, paradox, formal systems, isomorphism. Those are words that probably don't mean much to people unless they're put in context. And Hofstadter is very good at putting things in context. So what does that mean? It means that, for example, Kurt Gödel, part of one of the heroes in the narratives of both books. By the way, when I talk about the Strange Loop, the book that I read, it is a follow-up on Gödel, Escher, Bach, so is kind of like two books just explained a little bit deeper in two books. Meaning there was one book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and then the other book, I'm a Strange Loop, which is kind of a follow-up explanation on Gödel, Escher, Bach. But they're kind of the same thing. And the idea is that thinking has limits, logic has limits, that there are things, recursiveness in our thinking that can put us in a loop that has limits of logic. However, it is also a revealing subject in a sense that the loop that Hofstadter is talking about really turns out to be what we consider consciousness. It's a loop that allows us to come from nothing to consciousness, or in other words, we are made out of atoms, we are made out of matter, and that matter can turn into something symbolic, which at some point turns into what he calls the I, the me, and that is what we call consciousness. So this is the phenomenon that something conscious can come out of matter, which is part of the book, and which is a very interesting thing to think about. How can we come out of nothing? How can me? How can the I come out of matter? And what does that mean, the I? What is it actually? Now, I want to go. I want to go straight to the learnings and the ideas that I think the book gave me for the business. And here's a little caveat. When you are in the business of running a hedge fund, and the purpose of Orange Capital is to generate wealth by investing in technologically driven disruption with social impact. So when you have a purpose like that, you end up seeing, everything becomes a nail. You have the hammer, and now everything is a nail. Every book you read, every idea you hear, you always relate it to your purpose and what you can do. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. But of course, you also have to have the limits. If I see a bird flying in the air, I can't think about, okay, what does that mean for my business? if I have a good day bodyboarding on Ocean Beach in San Francisco, it probably doesn't have a lot of relationship with my business. So there are limits to this. But I want to say that Hofstadter's book, although very far removed from the hedge fund business, probably one of the books the farthest removed I've ever read in terms of running risk and making money in the markets. But there are still some things that I think are very useful. One is, like I said, the tools of thinking. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean necessarily that I'm going to use those tools now to analyze my investments, but it just tells me that, hey, wait a minute, you know what? The thinking itself should be thought about every now and then, because we are in danger of running ourselves into loops, into recursiveness, or into paradoxes, or some sort of infinite loops, or we are in danger of thinking the wrong way. Let's say it that way. And thinking the wrong way is dangerous because it can put us in a position where we don't have the right answers for the questions that we should be asking. So therefore the book is very useful. I think the book is also very useful for the AI side of our investments, which is part of our thesis and part of our purpose is to find disruptive technologies, and AI is part of that big disruption that we're going through. Like I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, I think the transformation from analog to digital intelligence is one of the biggest transformations, the mother of all transformations, if you will. And therefore thinking about thinking and thinking about what it actually means to be intelligent is incredibly useful. And Hofstadter gives a few good steps, a few good helpful indicators of what that could be. For example, when we think about the potential success of Tesla in AI, we think about the ability to create something which is conscious, or at least has consciousness type abilities out of nothing, out of sheer matter. Is that possible? And Hofstadter doesn't go specifically into the questions of AI and, for example, if you need a body for AI, but he does kind of allude to the fact that symbols are important for that. And symbols are, in my view, part of what Tesla is building in the AI engine that they have. Symbols being, for example, in the book, he mentions a very important sentence, which is the soap opera wars. Okay, this sentence is full of symbolic character. If you had to explain this sentence to somebody in Sanskrit 5,000 years ago, you would need hundreds of pages because they don't know what soap, opera, wars means. They don't know what each of those words means, and they absolutely have no idea what the combination of those words mean. So those are symbols, and you can start building symbols with AI. So we humans can build artificial intelligence by starting to build symbols. Now, I'm not talking about symbolic AI here, and I'm not qualified to talk about it. I'm talking about the statistical inference that creates that builds models out of data, so that uses what Carl Friston calls maximum likely methods, or reduces the variational free energy by using the data, creating models, and therefore increasing the likelihood that the future data will fit the models that you created. This is what Tesla is doing with the AI engine. This is what most people are doing with their AI engines. But the advantage that Tesla has, it's using a lot of real world data, real world vision driven data that then gets fed through the system, and tasks are being learned, and hopefully through the learning of the tasks, maybe some sort of consciousness type intelligence could emerge. What I mean with that is that you could have a car that after a while stops when there is a child playing even 10 meters away from the road. even though maybe that is not something that the AI engine specifically learns to do. Over time, the car learns that those types of situations could lead to unnecessary risk, and therefore slowing down would be prudent. And I think if the car starts doing these types of things, we would start feeling that the car has some sort of consciousness. Or a more extreme example is the trolley problem. I think I even asked Andrej Karpathy, the head of AI at Tesla at the Autonomy Day in 2019, if he has a solution for the trolley problem. He said no. I mean, that's not his business. But I feel like that if there is enough, and I hope that doesn't happen, but let's say if there were enough real cases where the car has to make a decision between saving a child's life and saving, let's say, an adult's life, over time, it is likely, if you have enough if you have enough, statistical, if you have enough such events, that the child will be saved, and therefore the car would start making those types of decisions, which are very human-like. We don't have a clear solution for that problem, but we have kind of a human type of thinking about it, some intuition that we should save a child in most cases. Those are things that are not hard-coded. Those are things that we can't hard-code. Nobody will hard-code something like that in an algorithm, but it is possible that the car, through creating those models by constant statistical inference, analyzing the data that it's presented, starts getting to some sort of intelligence and some sort of I, some sort of me, something that starts resembling like a conscious being, and therefore also starts acting intelligent in a human way. So to summarize, I think, first of all, I highly recommend Gödel, Bach, and I'm a Strange Loop. I think thinking about thinking is absolutely key for anybody, but particularly for people in the uncertainty business, like hedge funds. It humbles you to wake up in the morning and just ask yourself a few fundamental questions. Am I doing the right thing? Am I thinking the right way about my problems that I'm trying to tackle? And while Hofstadter has a very funny way to write, and sometimes his symbolism, let's say, he uses a lot of anecdotes and things like that, it could be a bit almost on the silly side, he's still an absolutely valuable intellectual, and it's just worth spending time with a brain like that through reading his book. So highly recommended. Final word, I think there is one thing that Hofstadter talks a lot is analogies. I think analogies that's almost worth an episode on its own. I think analogies are very, very useful because they can help you understand very complex problems. And kind of a twin of analogy is what I call the canonical problem. So the canonical problem would be if you could find like a core problem that summarizes most other problems which are related to what you're trying to solve. So I think analogies, canonical problem, those are systems, those are concepts that are very, very important for the hedge fund business. It is very important to find analogies, but it's also very dangerous. So I highly recommend anybody who is analyzing any kind of situation, stocks, macro situations, any kind of difficult, uncertain situation, to be very careful in choosing the analogies, because they can lead you astray very quickly. Okay, it is very dangerous to say, Tesla is the next Amazon, and it is a lot more dangerous to say, oh, this, Nikola is the Tesla of trucks, or Rivian is the Tesla of trucks. Those are analogies I highly recommend not to do. I think there is no such thing as this of that. Like what I mean is, in business, there is usually a unique form of solving a problem with a unique team, and nobody is the Google of something or the Tesla of something. This is just a side point. Of course, Hofstadter doesn't talk about this, but he talks about analogies, or he calls something along those lines, what he calls isomorphism, which is a term from mathematics. And I think it's very important to understand that it is very useful to find analogies, but it's also very dangerous, and you have to be very, very selective when you find analogies in the business of risk. Thank you.